I was curious, how does the how do the JWs promote their success or their expansion within the JW community? Do they have big events where they announce lots of good news or anything like that? Because that's a real big deal in Scientology.
Sure. Well, events have been very much a part of the JW calendar for decades, but probably they're structured differently to Scientology. I mean, from what I can tell, you have these events that seem to be focused around buildings and opening up buildings, opening ceremonies. We don't really have that. We do have dedications of new buildings, and they can sometimes be quite big events, but they're not given anywhere near the same kind of Hollywood treatment that Scientology gives. The main events for Jehovah's Witnesses are the regular conventions that take place on a yearly basis for most witnesses. In between that, you've got kind of smaller assemblies, which are about 1,000 people, and then you have the larger conventions that are between 5,000 and 10,000 people. And then you also have versions of those conventions that are kind of designed for people to come up from all over the world and kind of congregate, and they can be anything from 15 to 20,000 people. So you do have these big events, but they're not given, from what I can tell. Well, actually, let me go back. They haven't traditionally been given the same razzmatazz treatment that Scientology gives its opening ceremonies, but we are starting to see a great deal of hype surrounding the international conventions where governing body members are slated to appear. And there's a lot more hype surrounding them now. So you are starting to see people going crazy with handing out souvenirs and putting on special entertainment events for the convention delegates. So it's starting to go a little bit more like Scientology in that way.
Very, very interesting. You know, it's been a thing since the before. Okay, sorry, I'm rambling. Before Miscavige, David Miscavige, the current leader of Scientology, started the Ideal Organization program, which was around 2004. And since then, but all the way back to the 80s, he started this idea of international events where he would get thousands of Scientologists at a time to attend this big event, and he and other people, other Scientology luminaries, would go on stage and make these, you know, grandiose announcements about the expansion of Scientology and how great it was doing. And initially they were more fact-based. They showed actual facts and figures and had other people than Miscavige on the stage talking. And as the years progressed, it became, you know, it whittled down to just Miscavige standing on a stage.
Right.
And the facts and figures became more and more hype and less reality. You know, the graphs that they would show and things like that became ridiculous, ridiculously exaggerated. And and so, but I'm fascinated by what you just said, because you know, the JWs will have these events where you said, you know, 15,000 people, 10,000 people at a time could show up at these. You know, the big, huge. It's funny to me because in Los Angeles, where I worked, the big unachievable target for every single event, the one we never even came close to hitting, well, except once at one event, was 10,000. If we could get 10,000 people, you know, it was only
half of the Scientologists in the world, isn't it, or thereabouts?
Well, exactly, and it makes me wonder. You know, with your guys' events, it doesn't sound like it was that big of a deal to get that many people.
No, it's easy. They could do bigger ones if they wanted. And in fact, in the early years of Jehovah's Witnesses, there was like the heyday in the 1950s and 60s when they would literally cram, for example, the Yankee Stadium in New York with something like 250,000 witnesses, also tied in by audio link. So it's just purely the rules and regulations that stop them from doing that nowadays. But if they had the means to get, you know, those sorts of figures together again logistically, then they would do it. It's just purely the you know, health and safety regulations and the capacities of these stadiums that's preventing them, because, you know, you have 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses around the world. So it's really no stretch for them to get those sorts of figures.
Wow. Well, that is itself a statement about the size of Scientology, because those events are a real barometer for how many members they really have. And if Scientologists claim to have tens of millions of members, then it should be easy to pack the Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
And believe me, if they could, they would.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think all cults, like the self-congratulation of seeing throngs of people all crowded together to sing the praises of the leaders, it's something that really buys into the ego of cult leaders, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's interesting. In fact, I wanted to ask you about that. I was watching some videos, you know, some of the critiques and things that you do, or the breakdowns that you do, where the JW leaders are talking. And it's funny, these guys are these old, you know, I don't know, I don't want to say curmudgeon-y, but they're not very sinister looking people, you know?
No.
And, you know, David Miscavige in Scientology is kind of an intense man.
He's a Bond villain, isn't he, really?
Yeah, he's quite something, you know, and he really spends a lot of money and time to put on this very flashy, showy image, and he's very Tom Cruise-like that way, you know. It's no surprise he and Tom Cruise are BFFs, you know.
Yeah.
But looking at the JW governing body, I guess, these older men, it's quite different.
Yeah, well, that's a good observation. I think there's a reason why it's different. In Scientology, there's only really ever been LRH and Miscavige.
Mm-hmm.
And you had this kind of very, how can I put it, rather aggressive takeover that was staged by Miscavige once LRH died. We kind of had that in 1916, quite a long about 100 years ago. We had that when the original founder of Jehovah's Witnesses, Charles Taze Russell, died while he was on a train, and there was kind of like a leadership coup, and this strong authoritarian figure grabbed control of the organization. His name was Joseph Rutherford, and he was really our Miscavige. But we're talking, as I say, about 100 years ago that all that happened. The leaders of the organization that you see today have kind of arisen from an entirely different, how can I put it, evolutionary process. So that they're nothing like David Miscavige. What you look at when you look at the 7 governing body members that are currently in office, it's almost like the byproduct of like a microcosm of survival of the dumbest. So instead of it being a case of the smarter you are and the cleverer you are and the more aggressive you are, the more likely it will be that you'll be the leader. The way the leadership structure is set up with Jehovah's Witnesses is that the less independent thinking you have, the less education you have, the more you're willing to say yes, the more you're willing to follow orders, the more likely it will be that you will rise to the top.